Saturday mornings in the Turner household usually meant cereal, cartoons, and a late start. But on this particular day, 10-year-old Emily had woken up early, already dressed in her favorite hiking hoodie, ready for an outdoor adventure. Parents, Mark and Lisa, had promised her a trip to Pine Ridge Trail in Easy Loop, known for its peaceful views and wildflowers. Emily had always loved nature walks, especially the quiet ones where she could pretend she was on an expedition, discovering something new. The trail started off like any other. Birds chirped from high in the pine trees, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wild lavender and dust. Emily skipped a little ahead, her small boots crunching the gravel. Her parents followed at a slower pace, laughing about something grown-up, and sipping coffee from a thermostat. It wasn't long before they reached a scenic clearing. With a flat rock ledge perfect for sitting, they decided to take a short break. Emily wandered further ahead, drawn by the sound of wind rushing past the cliff edge. She knew not to get too close. Her parents had always warned her about cliffs. But as she stepped toward a bend in the path, something caught her eye. She froze at first. She thought it was a trick of the light. But when she leaned forward just slightly and looked down, her heart skipped. There, about 20 feet below, on a rocky ledge barely wide enough to stand on, was a golden retriever. It was covered in dirt, its fur tangled and matted, and it looked up at her with tired, pleading eyes. The dog wasn't barking. It wasn't moving much either. It just stood there, like it had been waiting for anyone to notice it. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She turned and shouted, "Mom, Dad, there's a dog on the cliff." But her voice was lost in the wind, and her parents were still setting up snacks and talking. She tried waving her arms. Nothing. The dog gave a faint whimper, so soft, she barely heard it. That was when Emily remembered something her dad always told her. If something ever goes wrong on the trail and we get separated, use the whistle. She reached into the small side pocket of her backpack and pulled out the emergency whistle he had given her months ago. She'd never used it before. It was supposed to be for danger, but this felt close enough. She blew into it loud and sharp. The sound cut through the air and echoed across the ridge. Her parents stood up instantly. "What was that, Emily?" her mum called out. "Over here," Emily yelled, waving her arms and pointing toward the cliff. "There's a dog, down there." They rushed over, worry on their faces. When they reached the spot, Emily pointed down. Mark stepped carefully to the edge and looked, then immediately reached out to pull her back to safety. "There really is a dog," he said slowly, eyes narrowing. "How did it even get there?" Lisa covered her mouth with both hands. "Oh no, it's stuck." The dog shifted slightly, still not barking. It looked exhausted and hungry, but there was a flicker of hope in its eyes. Emily knelt beside her. "Dad," peering over again. "We have to help it," she said firmly. Her father glanced at the steep slope, then back at the narrow ledge. "It's too dangerous to climb down. We'll have to call someone." "But what if no one gets here in time?" Emily whispered. Buck didn't have an answer. Lisa was already dialing the Park Services hotline. But Emily wasn't waiting for someone else. As her parents talked behind her, she kept watching the dog, thinking, planning, and beginning to wonder if she was meant to be the one to save it. Emily couldn't take her eyes off the dog. It was standing so still on the narrow ledge that she kept checking to make sure it was still breathing. Occasionally, its ears twitched, or its tail gave a small, uncertain wag, but otherwise, it didn't move. It looked tired, maybe even hurt. She didn't know how it had gotten there. But one thing was clear, it couldn't get back up on its own. Behind her, her mum was speaking to someone on the phone. Yes, a golden retriever. Stranded about 20 feet down a cliff near Marca. 7. No, it doesn't seem aggressive. It looks scared. She paused. How long will that take? Emily turned around. Her mother's face had changed. She had that look she got when things weren't going as planned. What did they say? Emily asked quickly. Lisa hesitated. They're sending someone, but it might be an hour, maybe more. There's only one ranger on duty right now. Emily looked back toward the dog. 1 hour felt like forever. The sun was already starting to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the cliff face. The dog seemed weaker now, its legs trembling a little. It lay down on the ledge, curling into itself like it had done this 1,000 times. Dad, Emily said suddenly. Do we still have rope in the car? Mark blinked. Rope? Yes. The hiking rope from last year. The one you said we shouldn't throw away. I think so. It's in the trunk with the other gear. Can we get it? Mark gave her a puzzled look. Emily, it's not safe. Even if we had rope, climbing down that cliff isn't something you just do. We should wait for the ranger. Emily didn't argue. Instead, she said something that caught her father completely off guard. I don't want to climb down. I want you to. Or maybe you hold the rope. I just need to get close enough to help. Mark stared at her. You want to go down there? Not all the way. Just enough to get the dog's attention. I'm not scared. I know how to tie the knots. Remember, he showed me when we practiced for summer camp. That was true. Emily had spent 2 weeks at her local adventure camp, where they learned basic rope work and climbing techniques. She'd been so proud when she passed the knot test. At the time, Mark had laughed and called her his tiny explorer. Now, she stood in front of him, not just a kid playing outdoors, but someone who had made up her mind. Mark looked back at the dog, then at Emily. All right, he said finally. Let's go check the trunk. They ran back down the trail, gravel crunching beneath their feet. When they reached the car, Mark popped open the trunk and pulled out a green canvas bag. Inside was a coiled rope, a helmet, a climbing harness that had clearly seen better days, and a few carabiners. Emily's eyes lit up. We can use this, she said. I'll wear the harness and you hold the rope. I'll go just far enough to get close, not too close to the edge. Mark exhaled slowly. He wasn't comfortable with the idea, but something in Emily's voice convinced him. She wasn't being reckless. She was being careful, prepared, and most of all, determined. All right, he said again, this time more firmly, but we do it together, and we stay safe. They turned back, toward the trail, the sun already beginning to fade. Emily tightened her hoodie and wrapped the rope around her shoulder like she had seen the older campers do. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew she couldn't walk away not with that dog still waiting. Silent and afraid, as they climbed back toward the cliff, Emily felt something she hadn't expected. Not fear but purpose. She was going to try, no matter what. When they returned to the cliff, the dog was still lying there, head resting on its paws, eyes half closed. It looked even more fragile than before. Emily's mum stood up when she saw the gear in Mark's hands. What are you doing? She asked, her voice rising. Mark gave her a calm but serious look. We're just going to take a closer look. Emily's not going down far, just to get a better sense of the situation. Lisa stepped forward. No, absolutely not. That ledge is narrow. One wrong step, I know, Mark interrupted gently. But the dog's not going to make it if we stand here doing nothing. And Emily's not going alone. I'll anchor the rope and stay in full control. Lisa opened her mouth to argue again. But then she looked at Emily. The girl's hands were already tightening the waist straps on the harness with practiced precision. Her eyes were focused, not frightened, not reckless, just quietly determined. Mark tied one end of the rope around the thick base of a nearby tree and the other to Emily's harness, double-checking every knot. Tell me the knot you're using, he asked, testing her memory. Double figure it, with a backup stopper, she replied without hesitation. Good. Mark looped the rope through a belay device and locked it into place on his climbing carabiner. He'd done this kind of setup dozens of times before during his youth. He never imagined he'd be doing it again to help his daughter rescue a dog off a cliff. Emily walked to the edge and looked down. The dog lifted its head slowly. Their eyes met again. She took a breath, ready. Mark crouched and held the rope firmly. Okay. Slow and steady. Just a few steps down. If anything feels wrong, say so, and I'll pull you up. Emily nodded, then took her first cautious step over the edge. The world narrowed to her boots, the rope, and the steady beat of her heart. The wind rushed around her ears as she stepped carefully down the slope. She wasn't going all the way, close enough to talk to the dog and maybe lower something to help. When she was about 10 feet down, she stopped. She could see the dog more clearly, now muddy, thin, and shaking. But it didn't growl or bark. It looked at her with trust. Somehow, the dog knew she wasn't a threat. Hey buddy, she called gently. It's okay. I'm here. The dog lifted its head slightly. Mark, from above, called down. That's far enough, Em. Stay right there. Emily turned toward the cliff wall, wedged her feet securely into a rock groove, and opened her small backpack. Inside was a granola bar, some trail mix, and her water bottle. She twisted off the cap and carefully lowered the bottle down with a thin piece of cord. The dog sniffed at the water and licked the rim. It drank slowly, carefully. Then it looked back up at her. Behind them, they heard the hum of tires on dirt. A park ranger's ATV was rolling up the trail. Another hiker must have alerted them. The ranger stepped off quickly. What's going Aunt Lisa rushed to explain. The ranger peered over the edge and saw Emily in position. His eyes widened, but instead of panicking, he nodded slowly. "She's doing all right," he said, "but let's get you some backup. I've got proper rescue gear in my pack." As the ranger began pulling out a harness and anchor system, Emily kept talking to the dog. "You're doing great," she whispered. "Just hang in there. We've got help coming." For the first time, the dog stood up shakily, but upright. Its tail gave a faint wag. It knew. Emily smiled. She had climbed partway down a cliff for a creature no one else had noticed, and somehow, in the middle of danger and doubt, she had made the dog feel safe. The ranger's name was Scott, and though he had seen plenty of trail emergencies before, this was his first time arriving to find a 10-year-old girl halfway down a cliff face tethered safely. Speaking calmly to a stranded dog and holding her position like a seasoned climber, Mark gave a quick rundown, while keeping his hands steady on the rope. Scott nodded, impressed. "She's brave," he said, pulling a radio from his belt, "and smart. Most kids would be panicking. I'll call in a backup unit, but we may not need them. We just have to finish this rescue carefully." Lisa stood nearby, tense, but no longer protesting. Seeing Emily in action had changed something. Her fear hadn't vanished, but she had begun to understand. Emily wasn't acting out, she was stepping up. Down on the slope. Emily shifted slightly, keeping her boots locked in place. She could feel her calves burning, but she wasn't going to complain. The dog was still standing now, tail barely moving, eyes locked on her. It had begun to pace in a small circle on the ledge, and that worried her. "Stay still, buddy," she whispered. "Don't move too much." Above her, the ranger worked quickly. He secured a second rope, checked his harness, and clipped in. "All right," he said to Mark. "I'm going down the rest of the way. I'll bring him up." Mark nodded. "Emily, hold tight. Ranger Scott is coming down to you." Emily turned and gave a thumbs dash up. Scott began descending smoothly, his boots making small taps on the rocky surface. In a matter of moments, he reached Emily's position. He anchored himself to a secure point, then turned to her. "You did a great job," he said softly. "Now I'll take it from here." Ready to climb back up. Emily hesitated, then looked at the dog. "Wait," she said. "He trusts me. If I leave too soon, he might panic. Can I stay here just a little longer while you go down to him?" Scott studied her face. She wasn't being reckless. She was thinking about the animal's safety. He gave a short nod. "All right, but you don't move." "Understood." "Understood." Scott lowered himself another few feet, slowly approaching the ledge. The dog backed up slightly, tail low, ears back. "Easy, buddy," Scott said. "I'm a friend. Emily's still right there, see?" The dog's eyes darted from Scott to Emily, then back again. Emily leaned slightly forward and spoke in the same soft tone she had used before. "It's okay, he's here to help. You're gonna be okay now." With surprising gentleness, the dog allowed Scott to slide a harness loop around its chest. It trembled, but didn't fight. "Got him," Scott called. "I'm going to start." The lift. Mark braced the ropes, and with slow, careful movements, he and Scott began guiding the dog up the cliff wall. Emily watched every moment. When the dog finally reached the top and Mark helped ease him over the edge, everyone clapped and let out breathless sighs of relief. Emily finally allowed herself to relax. Her hands were sore, her legs numb, but she smiled. Scott climbed up next and unclipped from the rope. He looked at Emily, eyes full of admiration. "I've worked this trail for 12 years, he said, "and I've never seen someone do what you just did, especially not someone your age." Emily just shrugged. "He needed help. I was there." The dog, now lying safely on the grass, rolled over to reveal a collar buried under its matted fur. Something glinted beneath the grime. Lisa walked over with a towel and gently wiped the dog's neck. There, clipped to the collar, was a small plastic capsule. She opened it slowly and, inside was a folded paper and a tiny memory card. Mark looked over her shoulder. "What in the world?" Emily stepped closer. The dog nudged her hand gently, with its nose, and she smiled again, this time with wonder. They had saved a life, but they were about to uncover a mystery no one had seen coming. Lisa carefully unfolded the small, dirt-smudged paper from the capsule on the dog's collar. The handwriting was shaky, but legible. Mark leaned in beside her as Emily crouched close to the dog's side, gently stroking its head. The note read, "If you found this dog, his name is Rocket. He escaped after I was taken. Please, someone find the USB. It's important." I don't know how long I have Ellen. Mark read the message again, slower this time. Taken, he whispered. USB. What does that mean? Lisa held up the tiny memory card. This has to be the USB, the note mentions. But who is Elm Scott? The ranger stepped closer. Glancing at the paper, his expression grew serious. We need to report this. There's a ranger station not far from here. They have a laptop and satellite connection. We can check what's on that card. Emily looked at the dog Rocket. He had perked up a little, his eyes brighter now, tail tapping the ground. He leaned into her touch as if he understood everything around him. He ran for help, she said, quietly. He came all this way, by himself. Scott nodded. He may have saved more than himself. Within 20 minutes, they were packed up and riding in Scott's ATV, down a dirt trail that wound toward the ranger station. Rocket sat beside Emily, his head resting on her lap as the vehicle bumped along. She wrapped a blanket around him and whispered gently, "You're a hero too." The ranger station sat tucked beneath tall trees, its radio antenna just barely poking above the canopy. Inside, Scott opened his laptop and slid the memory card into a reader. Mark and Lisa stood behind him, while Emily waited on the bench with Rocket curled at her feet. The screen flashed once, then loaded a single file. Backup footage _lm.mp4, double quotes. Scott clicked it. The video was grainy at first, taken from what looked like a cabin security camera. It showed a small wooden house, surrounded by dense forest. A man middle-aged, thin, wearing a hoodie, was pacing nervously on the porch. The timestamp was from 5 days earlier. Then headlights appeared in the distance. The man turned, panicked. He grabbed a backpack and ran toward a tree line. But before he could vanish, two figures stepped out of a black SUV. They wore matching jackets and walked fast. The man hesitated, then shouted something unintelligible. That's when the video froze, cut off. The next few seconds were just static. Then the final frame appeared, a handwritten label, shown up close to the camera. "If I don't make it out, this is my proof. Rocket knows the way." Elm Scott leaned back slowly in his chair. "This is serious." Mark nodded. "This isn't just someone who got lost. He was hiding from something. And Rocket got out alone with this." Emily looked at the screen, her voice steady. "So what do we do?" Scott stood up and walked to the radio. "First, we contacted the authorities. I'll send the video to the state police and let them investigate. If this man is still out there, maybe that dog helped him survive." Rocket barked once, just once, as if answering the question. As the sun dipped low beyond the trees, Emily watched the sky turn golden. She had come out for a normal hike and ended up saving a life, uncovering a mystery, and finding a friend in a dog braver than anyone had realized. But something deep in her gut told her this wasn't over. Somewhere out there, someone was still missing, and the truth behind Rocket's journey hadn't fully come to light. The authorities arrived by nightfall, 2 state officers in plain clothing and 1 man from a special unit, who introduced himself simply as Agent Harris. He reviewed the footage with Scott and Mark, while Lisa sat with Emily and Rocket, trying to comfort them both. Rocket had eaten some kibble and drank more water, but he still wouldn't leave Emily's side. The dog seemed to trust her more than anyone else. Every time someone approached, his ears twitched. But he'd only relaxed when Emily whispered something softly or scratched behind his ear. Agent Harris turned from the screen. "There's something strange about the video," he said. "That cabinet's not listed in any of the forest records. We've had reports of illegal builds in this region, and this might be one of them." "Could it be someone hiding out?" Mark asked. Harris nodded. "Possibly, but this guy Elm, whoever he is, knew someone was coming for him. And that dog carried this card a long way." Lisa spoke up. "So how do you find the cabin?" "That's the problem," Harris said. "The footage cuts before there's any real detail. We don't know where the cabin is. We only know that Rocket got out, and maybe he knows the way back." At that moment, Emily sat up straighter. "He does," she said. "Rocket does know." Everyone turned to look at her. Emily gently tugged the blanket from Rocket's shoulders and stood. "He ran away from something. He made it all the way to that cliff. That means he traveled from the cabin to where we found him. He knows the path." Scott scratched his chin. "If he retraced his steps," Agent Harris caught on, "he could lead us back." "But only if he's willing," Emily added. They all exchanged glances. It was a long shot, but it might be their only real lead. By morning, they had a plan. Harris and 2 officers would follow Rocket on foot with Emily close by. Scott would monitor their movement via GPS, and Lisa, although reluctant, agreed to let Emily join with a promise that she wouldn't take a single step off the marked trail without adult supervision. They set off just after sunrise. The forest was quiet and cool, the air still heavy with mist. Rocket moved with new purpose. He sniffed the path ahead, turned occasionally, then trotted forward. The group followed in silence, every step deeper into the woods. After about an hour, Rocket stopped at a narrow game trail, hidden by low shrubs. He looked back at Emily, then darted down the path without hesitation. Harris raised his hand. Let's follow. Carefully. The path was tight, winding through trees that grew closer together the farther they walked. Branches snapped underfoot. At one point, Rocket paused at a broken wooden sign buried in leaves. Emily cleared the dirt from it. Burned into the wood were the faint letters. Laurel Mine Trail closed. Harris narrowed his eyes. This trail isn't on any active map. It must have been decommissioned years ago. Rocket led them down it with confidence, his nose low, his steps steady. Eventually, they reached a narrow ravine. A downed tree formed a natural bridge across the gap. Rocket crossed it slowly, pausing in the center to look back. Emily crossed after him, her heart thudding in her chest. Once they were across, she noticed something odd. Deep boot prints, fresh ones, leading off the path into the trees. Harris knelt and examined them. Someone else has been here recently. Rocket suddenly froze, his ears alert. A faint noise echoed through the woods, something like metal striking wood, then silence. Emily whispered, I think we're close. Rocket moved again, more cautiously now. They followed him another 100 yards, until the trees opened slightly and then just beyond the clearing, they saw it. The cabin. It was real, and someone was still inside. The cabin stood at the edge of the clearing, weathered and leaning slightly, with ivy creeping up one side and a tarp half draped over the roof. A single chimney puffed out the thinnest trail of smoke fresh. Someone was definitely inside. Agent Harris raised a closed fist, signaling for silence. He turned to Emily and whispered, Stay behind me. Whatever's going on here, we don't know if it's safe. Rocket didn't bark, didn't growl, but he didn't stop moving either. He walked straight toward the cabin, step by step, low but steady. When he reached the front porch, he sat down beside the door and stared at it. Harris stepped forward slowly, his hand hovering near his belt. He knocked twice, sharp and firm. Silence. Then came the sound of movement, slow, dragging footsteps across the wooden floor. Inside, a few seconds later, the door creaked open. Standing in the frame was a gaunt man with sunken eyes, his face pale and hollow. He looked around at the group, his gaze lingering on Rocket first, then on Emily, and then he smiled weakly, but with unmistakable recognition. You found him, he said. His voice was dry, barely above a whisper. He made it. Emily stepped forward slightly. Are you LM? He nodded. Luke Maddox. Agent Harris lowered his stance, recognizing there was no immediate threat. Mr. Maddox, we found the message on your dog. What's going on here? Luke turned and slowly stepped aside. Come in. You need to see this. Inside the cabin, the group was greeted by a clutter of papers, a laptop with cracked hinges, and maps spread across a folding table. Luke moved slowly, clearly exhausted. He sank into a chair and gestured toward the files. I used to work in environmental data analysis, he began. A few months ago, I discovered records showing falsified reports on land clearing and illegal mining within the protected park zones. It was being covered up, companies bribing small-time officials to keep it off the books. Mark leaned in. So you exposed them? Luke shook his head. I tried. I sent evidence to 3 different agencies. A week later, someone broke into my home. I went on the run. This cabin belonged to an old hiking friend. I thought I could hide here and finish collecting proof. He pointed to a small safe under the table that memory card Rocket carried. Just a copy. The real files are in there, Harris asked. And the people who came for you? They found me 2 nights ago, Luke said. I heard them approaching, grabbed Rocket, and ran into the woods. But I slipped on a slope. I hit my head, woke up alone. He was gone. I thought he'd abandoned me. Emily smiled. He didn't. He found us. He led us here. Luke's eyes filled with tears. That dog saved my life. Harris opened the safe, confirming the documents, and drove inside. This is enough to start a federal investigation, he said. Suddenly, Rocket let out a low growl. Emily turned. What is it, boy? Harris moved to the window and peeked out, and his face changed. Vehicle approaching. SUV. Same make as the one in your footage. Luke. Everyone moved into action. Harris signaled to the two officers in the trees behind the cabin, take positions. If they're armed, we take no risks. Rocket stood beside Emily, his body tense, ready. The SUV came into view slowly, headlights cutting through the trees. It stopped just outside the clearing. The passenger door opened. Emily's breath caught in her throat as a man in black boots stepped out and looked directly at the cabin, and then, with eerie calmness, he reached into his coat pocket. The man in black boots stood motionless, his hand slipping into his coat as tension rose like thunder in the cabin. Agent Harris dropped to one knee and signaled to his team. "Hold," he said calmly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Wait to confirm intent." Emily clutched Rocket's collar gently, feeling the tremble under his fur. But Rocket didn't whine or cower. He stood tall, gaze fixed on the figure outside. The man pulled something from his coat. For a split second, everyone's tense fingers hovered over triggers, hearts raced. But it wasn't a weapon, it was a phone. He lifted it, tapped the screen, and held it to his ear. Then, as if realizing he was being watched, he turned in casually, walked back to the SUV. "That's a scout," Harris said under his breath. "He came to check the area." "Now what?" Emily asked, barely above a whisper. "We need to get Luke out of here immediately," Harris replied. "They'll return, and they won't come alone." In 10 minutes, they had a plan. One officer would stay behind, hidden, to track any returning vehicles. Harris would escort Luke and the evidence to a secure location in the nearest town, while Scott and Mark guided Lisa and Emily back through the woods on an alternate route. But when they tried to load Rocket into the vehicle, he wouldn't go. He looked back at the cabin, then at Emily, and let out a soft whine. "He wants to stay," Emily said quietly. "He knows the danger isn't over." Scott frowned. "He's just a dog, Em. He did his part." "No," she said. "He's more than that." Rocket turned and trotted to the porch, nose low, ears twitching. Then he darted behind the cabin and disappeared into the trees. Mark called after him, but Emily stopped him. "Let him go. He's trying to help." They didn't understand how she knew, but she was right. 15 minutes later, as the SUV carrying Luke turned onto a gravel road, Harris's radio buzzed. "This is Unit 2, a voice said. "We've got movement 3 SUVs heading toward the cabin. ETA 5 minutes. "Too late to turn back," Harris muttered. "Let's hope we've got a buffer." But that buffer came from somewhere unexpected. Back at the cabin, the scout who had visited earlier had returned with others. As they approached the porch, they found the front door wide open. The cabin was empty. They entered carefully, scanning the corners until a deep growl came from the shadows. Rocket emerged from behind the table, snarling, hackles raised. Then another growl echoed. And another. From the tree line, 4 other dog strays, who'd followed Rocket's path, stepped out, surrounding the cabin. Barking began to erupt from all sides. Loud, sharp, chaotic. Startled by the sudden threat and the noise, the intruders froze. Then, a voice from the woods shouted, "Federal agents. Hands up." They were surrounded. The officers, using Rocket's distraction, moved in. Within minutes, all 3 men were in cuffs. The dogs quieted as the tension fell. Rocket standing proudly in the doorway like a sentinel. 3 days later, Emily sat in a quiet ranger office as Luke Maddox gave a press statement. His story had broken statewide. The investigation was underway. Arrests were happening, and protected lands were being secured again. When asked how the evidence was saved, Luke smiled and said only one word: Rocket. Later that afternoon, the ranger station held a small celebration. Rocket was there, wearing a new collar with a golden tag that read Forest Guardian. Children came to pet him, and rangers shook Emily's hand with respect. Lisa watched, her daughter, pride shining in her eyes. "You were right," she whispered. "He needed help, but maybe we did too." Emily looked down at Rocket, who sat quietly beside her, tail wagging. "He wasn't just trying to survive," she said. "He was trying to lead someone to the truth. And in the end, he did exactly that."